I once had a college professor that said that when it comes to watching shows, movies, reading books, consuming art, that we should do it like we eat an apple. We should eat the meat of the apple and really consume it, enjoy it, and then we should spit out the pits. Meaning that there are going to be great parts about shows and books, works of art that you can love, and then there are going to be things that you don't love that you should just spit out and don't think about them anymore. And Rings of Power is really becoming that for me right now. I think that there are a lot of things that I like about the show. As someone who was very skeptical about it going in, there's a lot of things that I was very pleasantly surprised about, but then there are lots of things that just honestly I have to spit out because I don't really love yet and I don't know if they're going to get better. So I want to talk about both those things in this really quick review of episode 4. I'm excited to hear your thoughts down below, so please leave me your thoughts. What do you think? Where do you agree with me, disagree with me? Let's be respectful in the dialogue, but hey, I'd love to hear what you guys think below, and be sure to hit that like button because it shows this video more people. Okay, let's jump into it. All right, let's hit some big bullet points from the show. Let's start in Numenor. Now, in Numenor, we get this really great shot, and they continue to showcase their VFX prowess in this show by showcasing the shot of Numenor being destroyed. I think that's beautiful. I think the music, of course, is great. It's kind of becoming a little bit of like a trope in my mind, how good the music and visuals are in this show. It's a really beautifully shot show, and it really brings you into Middle-earth, which I think is what it's supposed to do. We kind of get to see Pharazôn in this show be a little bit more political and crafty with the crowd there, which is a cool time. I think that's really cool. I think, of course, if Pharazôn is our Pharazôn that eventually becomes the king, of course, he's going to be a very, very evil character. He is going to be the one that actually leads to the destruction of Numenor over time. So it was cool to see him kind of come into his own, not just be an advisor, but be someone who could win the crowd over with his speeches of, you know, people aren't going to come and take your jobs, as they would say in South Park. So I thought that was really good. Now, then we go over to Theo in the tower and kind of Theo going into the village where the orcs are. And hey, I just got to say it, it's properly creepy. It's a properly creepy show. And I think that's a good thing in general. I think that there's a lot of tension in these moments. There are even moments where I'm kind of like shielding my eyes. Like, I know when he goes around the corner, there's going to be that orc there. I know it's going to happen. And so I think that's a positive for the show. I do think that there was a little bit of a negative and kind of really unbelievable part in this series where we see him jump into a well and splash into it, and then the orc goes and checks it out. But then when he comes out with like this much larger gasp, it's like, you know, like it's like this whole, it's like the orc doesn't even hear it, which is so strange. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's a little Scooby-Doo. I wrote down Scooby-Doo in my notes. I was like, is it really, he just like comes out and gasps and nobody even knows? Anyway, hey, well, we start out with meeting Adar, this evil elf that there's a lot of speculation around who he is. I think that there are some other channels that do that better, like Nerd of the Rings, than I do. But I will say this, as someone who has come in and been very critical of the way they portrayed elves in the show, it was this really meta moment when Adar, who is this long-haired evil elf, is standing next to this elf with a buzz cut. And like, I don't like the non-long-haired elves. And it's so funny because with Adar, they very obviously pulled off a great long-haired elf that looks just like the elves from, you know, Tolkien's artwork and Peter Jackson's trilogy. I just don't know why they didn't do this in the first place. I mean, he looks so much more like an elf. In fact, when I'm watching this, I almost think that Hyrondir is the man and that, you know, Adar is the elf. But hey, properly creepy character for Adar. Liked that he was kind of really taking care of the orcs. It kind of gave this like, ooh, who would really want to take care of them? But that was a really cool moment. I'm interested to see what his character turns into. I don't think he's Sauron. I think I said that last episode of review. Obviously, probably not Sauron. I do like that the showrunners are keeping Sauron from us. Like, they're really almost playing with the audience like Middle-earth people would have been played with in the Second Age, which is, you don't know who he is, like, right? Like, he's very obviously in the shadows. And have we seen him yet? Have we not? Actually, let me know. Do you think we've seen him yet? Do you think he's Halbrand or whatever? Let me know in the comments. Do you think we've seen him yet, or is he waiting to be revealed? I mean, of course we saw him in the intro sequence, but you know what I mean, like now amongst the characters. And then we go into Khazad-dûm, and you guys, I just gotta say, like, I don't like the whole Durin hereditary thing. And for those of you guys that don't know, Durin was, you know, the third, the fourth, the fifth. In Tolkien's lore, dwarves believed in reincarnation. And so Durin the First was the first great king of the dwarves, and his subsequent lines were not named Durin unless the dwarf had showcased that they deserved the name, like that, and they believed then that the spirit of Durin had been reincarnated into that dwarf. And so to have the hereditary Durin line, I don't like. It's a total lore misstep in my opinion. But I will say, the actor who is playing Durin and then the actor who is playing Elrond have such perfect, incredible chemistry. And it's so well written, and even Disa's doing a great job despite a lot of uproar about her. really good storyline there. Like, I've just got to say, of all the storylines in the show, theirs is the one that I wish they would just have made their own show. Because I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. I don't think the storyline in this show is necessarily great right now, but I love theirs. I think theirs is so good, and I'd really just love to see more of theirs. They do go into the old mine. They learn more about Mithril, which is really cool. I even like the lore callback in these moments where Durin will not tell Elrond the dwarven word for Mithril, which was very accurate to the lore. And then there's these awesome moments, of course, where Elrond then talks about his father Eärendil, who becomes the star, who takes a Silmaril upon his brow and becomes a star in the sky. Really freaking cool. I love those lore references in this show. I am wondering, with this mine that they're digging very deep in this secret place, is this going to then awaken Durin's Bane? Will we learn in this show maybe that the Balrog that comes out of this deep tunnel, if they ever end up doing that, would be actually killing this Durin, and then that would be the Durin's Bane that we're talking about? It would be an interesting take. I don't know if fans would love that, but it would be a very interesting take. Then after all of this, we go back to Numenor, and of course Isildur then fails intentionally his boating driver's test, whatever, and gets his friends kicked out too, which makes absolutely zero sense. In this scene, he releases a rope that then his friends go and catch and make sure that everything works, and then the friends that actually did their job get kicked out as well because of Isildur. It doesn't make any sense. I think it was the showrunners trying to make us feel like his actions were more significant than they were, which, I mean, nobody, like, the guys did their job. It didn't make any sense to me in that scene. You guys know what I'm talking about there. And now we go back to Numenor, and up until this point, the story has been okay. It's not been that great. The episode's just been kind of people getting moved into place, in my opinion, for maybe some big battle that's coming later on. But this scene between Galadriel and Miriel, where, you know, Galadriel then breaks into Miriel's apartment to confront her and try to convince her to have the Numenorians come and fight alongside the elves, even though Galadriel does not have the backing of the elves, against Sauron and the Southlands and all that stuff. This scene so perfectly describes the good and the bad in the show. So Galadriel begins to have this conversation with Miriel, who Miriel reveals to her that the Palantir has showed her that Galadriel brings with her the destruction of Numenor. So Miriel, as the Queen Regent, is trying to get Galadriel to get off the island at any cost. We've just got to get her out of here, which makes complete sense if you're Miriel and you believe that this is the doom of her country, her island that she rules. But then Galadriel essentially just goes, hey, remember that, like, your dad was loyal to the elves? You should be too. And Miriel's like, okay, cool. And, like, completely turns on a dime, which doesn't make any sense with her character. Like, she doesn't trust Galadriel at all. She hasn't trusted her yet. Galadriel has shown herself only to be a negative force in Numenor at this point. And yet she just, like, instantly turns on a dime and says, yeah, even though you bring the destruction of Numenor, we should trust you and keep you here. It doesn't make any sense, unfortunately. But then, again, like, the lore callbacks in this show and those, like, little things like the member berries, you know, like, for South Park fans out there, the things that really make you go, I remember that. They walk past Narsil in the shot, and it was really beautiful. And I did say last episode that I thought the sword that Miriel gave to Elendil was Narsil. I was completely wrong about that, obviously. I thought it was, based on some of the marketing that had been done about it, but we see actually Narsil sitting on the wall, and I thought this was really cool. Like, you're like, wow, that's awesome. And then we get to see a Palantir. But then the Palantir, kind of with the lore, as much as, like, there's a great lore callback with Narsil, then the Palantir goes and shows Galadriel a vision of the future, which doesn't really make sense from, like, a deep lore perspective for what the Palantirs are for, at least from what I know about them. I'm not the biggest, deepest nerd, but I'm a pretty big nerd on this. The Palantir were seeing stones. They could see into and reveal things like Sauron's plans, but they couldn't necessarily see into the future, and yet that's what it's showcasing here. Not a huge thing, but it's one of those little lore missteps that all in this one scene, we have this abrupt change of character that doesn't make sense. We have a really cool lore callback, and then we have kind of a Spirit of Tolkien not really sitting well with me kind of moment. And I think that's kind of one of those things that really calls the whole show. Like, I'm all about that in the whole show. And that to me is, like, some of the bigger issue with the show in general is that we have this, like, great cool callback to, like, lore, but then you have characters that are totally turning on a dime that don't make sense. But then on the other end over here, we have another lore piece that is kind of cool, but not that great. It's a very strange thing as a Tolkien fan to watch this show, because you want to see more Middle Earth and you like some of the things that are happening, but then there's other things that you're just like, this just feels mediocre to me in some ways. And so that's just how I feel about the show in general right now. I'm kind of at a 6 or 7 out of 10. I was at an 8 after last episode. After this episode, it's just moving so slow, and I'll get to some of the goods and the bads, but really I'm just not fully invested in the story yet. I think I wrote this down at this point on my notes. I was just like, after seeing Galadriel, look at the Palantir, and then there's this moment where we're gonna go storm Numenor together. I don't know, guys. I just can't really love the show because I'm just not really compelled by the story. I think the show writers, in the way that they're writing these scenes, assume that I am into the story and that we are into the story. I just haven't been sold on it yet. Maybe I'm just being a hard ass, but that's just kind of how I feel. But hey, to end out this show, I will just say that it was, the running through the forest scene where, Arondir catches the arrow and puts it back. Super awesome. I'm all in. I like the super cool elf moments where they go in and just do everything right and it's almost impossible. That's super cool. I didn't love how at the end of the forest scene, they get there and then suddenly the orcs don't have any archers and they're just going to stare at them for a full 10 seconds without shooting at them. I think it would have been a really cool moment actually to have one of these characters get killed. Whether it be Arondir or the woman, I can't even remember her name right now to be honest with you because I don't care about these characters because I just can't connect with these new made-up characters. I don't even remember her name, but it would have been cool if one of them would have died. That would have spurned on a lot of character development in my mind, but unfortunately did not happen. And then we end with Durin talking to his dad, and there's this beautiful father-son moment that I was like, this is actually really touching. And there's this obvious mistrust between Durin and Elrond, and so Durin the younger is going to go to Lindon and try to figure out what's going on, which again is really compelling. It's a good storyline. The dwarves and the elves having this natural mistrust for one another, even with his friend. I'm really, really excited about this one. That's the storyline that I actually like in this series. So, hey, those were just my general overview points, just some things that I thought. Do you agree with me? Do you not? But let's get into some of the big overarching goods and bads from this episode. Okay, the first good, and surprisingly for me as a Tolkien fan, is some of the lore callbacks. I really like some of the callbacks to lore. I love Elrond talking about his father, and I think that really developed Elrond's character with the lore that his father went off and as Eärendil ascended into the heavens with the Silmaril on his brow, and what would this have done to Elrond as a kid? I think this is a really cool idea, and it was cool to see them flesh this out. I loved seeing Narsil leaning against the window. I even loved when Galadriel talked about her heritage. I thought that was really cool. And you'll actually notice that Farazan actually did some really interesting revisionist history here, which was a really cool touch where he actually said that Elros was the one that led all of the armies against the armies of Melkor, which was very obviously not true. I thought that was cool too. It made you kind of really think, and as a lore fan, there were some really cool callbacks in this episode, which, again, the show does tend to do quite a bit, which I really like. Another great thing, of course, the atmosphere is sublime. Bear McCreary is absolutely crushing it on music. I think that the visuals are beautiful. I do think that I'm getting used to the visuals. It's kind of like in Peter Jackson's trilogy when you come around and see Rivendell for the first time, you're like, wow, but by the time they're at the council, you're really paying attention to the story, and we'll talk about story in just a moment, but I still think the atmosphere is worth really praising them about. And then third, I would just say that the Durin and Elrond storyline, their characters are just yes. They so shine in these initial episodes that it blows my mind. I wish that they had their own show. I don't really care about anything else that's going on around the show right now, to be honest with you. It's just not captured me yet, but those two are putting the show on their backs. They need a shoulder massage because they've been carrying this thing for 4 full episodes now at this point. All right, now let's talk about the negatives from me in this episode, and this kind of goes to cover a lot more of the entire show, and it's really this. The story is just genuinely uninspired. It's not really that good, with the exception in my mind of Elrond and Durin. The stories just aren't really there. They haven't earned my excitement yet. And the reason that I'm really coming down on this is because I was watching the Nerd of the Rings breakdown of this episode, and he said this at the beginning, and it blew my mind. He goes, we're actually over halfway done with this first season, or I guess now halfway, because we've finished 4 episodes. There's going to be 8. I'm just not in the story halfway through the season. And I mean, picture this. Imagine being halfway through Fellowship of the Ring When you were halfway through Fellowship of the Ring, you were all in. Like, you were all the way in. You wanted to know what happened. It's why those movies were so good. This story just doesn't compel me yet. None of the stakes are really seemingly that high at this point. Nothing that's going on makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you, in some ways. You know, Galadriel going and talking to Miriel and then completely changing Miriel's mind without even doing anything at all doesn't make any sense, and it just feels like they're trying to contrive these moments to get the audience to go, yes, I identify, and I just don't really dig it. I really don't. I wish that it was better, because I think that Tolkien has such a great story to tell, and for a normal TV show, this would be an average story. It would be okay, there would be some storylines that you like, some that you don't like, but Amazon decided to call this Lord of the Rings, so it's going to be judged to Tolkien's standard, and unfortunately, in my opinion, in most cases, it just falls short. It just doesn't have a super compelling story. I am interested to see what happens next because it's called Lord of the Rings. There's kind of a double-edged sword there, but it just feels kind of uninspired, and the moments don't feel earned because there aren't really any stakes. The characters aren't really developed, which leads me to bad number 2. The characters are like super lackluster to me. And I know that that's really rude, but I just don't dig the characters. I mean, Galadriel's character, like, who is she? Like, just honestly, who is she? Cate Blanchett, with like 30 minutes of screen time in all the trilogy, had a better character than Galadriel has had with her like probably 2.5 hours at this point of screen time. She's just not really interesting. She's not wise, but I guess she's supposed to be brave, but she kind of just comes off as dumb because, you know, she's screaming at the queen about this king that she's never allowed to see and expects that to work. And, you know, she just comes off as this real moron. She has to be guided by 2 men. At this point, Halbrand has like given her great advice, and Elendil, but she's supposed to be the wisest and fairest of all elves by the Second Age, and she's just not. And I know I'm really harping in on Galadriel. There's a lot of other characters here, like Arondir. Like, what is his character? Is it just brooding elf who's in love with a woman? Like, there's nothing really there that makes me attached to these characters. Like, you can think about every member of the Fellowship of the Ring. Let's even just take the 4 hobbits. You knew Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. By the time they reached Rivendell, you knew exactly who those characters were. You knew who the goofballs were, you knew who the loyalist was, you knew who the smarter one was, and you knew who the one that was conflicted about his journey was. I just said that, and I'm sure you know exactly who I was talking about. I just don't see that with the characters yet, and that's a real bummer. And both of those lead to my third gripe about Rings of Power right now, is that these moments that are supposed to be huge just really don't feel earned. Because the story is not fantastic in my opinion, and because the characters outside of Elrond and Durin are just kind of flat and they don't really have any substance to them, they have these big moments where, you know, Miriel and Galadriel at the end of the episode are like, let's go storm the castle, and you're like, okay, cool. It doesn't really make sense to your character. Like, Miriel, if she's really the, like, if Galadriel is supposedly the person that's actually going to destroy Numenor, then shouldn't you send her away? Like, that doesn't seem smart to keep her there. But she does, and it's kind of like not earned. It doesn't feel that great. You know, when Isildur like fails his boating test and his friends are mad at him, you're just kind of like, I don't know, okay, cool. Like, I don't know. Like, I just haven't had anything yet where I'm really identifying with the characters. I haven't had anything yet that tells me that the characters are great, that the story is great. So these big moments just don't feel earned yet. Now, of course, we're only halfway through the season. I might be eating my words in 4 episodes, and I really hope that I do, because I really want this show to work. I do. And the reason is because I don't really care for this show specifically. I just want to see more Middle-earth made into films, made into TV adaptations, made into video games, because I love Middle-earth. I love Tolkien, and I don't feel like Amazon is doing a great job carrying the torch right now. I think they're doing really okay in some areas, and you can tell that the parts that are Tolkien are really shining through, but the parts that are like Amazon's writing and character development, it's just not great. I can think of 8 other shows right now that have done better character development in their first 4 episodes than this has. I mean, honestly, think about it. How I Met Your Mother. You knew exactly who the characters were and you were in love with them. Breaking Bad, even though they were still developing Walter White, phenomenal. Like, you knew exactly who he was. You were already rooting for him even though he was the bad guy. There are so many others out there, and I just don't see that with this show yet, and I want to. it's either a slow burn show and it's a super slow burn show, or these elements are just always going to be there. And while a lot of the cool lore callbacks will be fun for us as fans, as much as the music and visuals are going to look cool, I think at the end of the day, this show just seems to fall flat. And I'm kind of bored when I watch it. Like, I pull my phone out way too many times just to look at Twitter while I'm watching what should be the greatest Lord of the Rings epic of the last decade. I mean, honestly, because it's the only one, but it's just not that epic yet. But again, I could be wrong, and those are just my opinions. That's just how I feel about this episode. I don't think it's a total trash episode. I don't think it's the best episode in the world. I just give it like a 5 or 6. I'm kind of meh. I'm kind of right in there in the middle between it's terrible and it's great. There are some great things, the meat that we should chew in the apple, then there are some pits that we should spit out. And I'm continuing to enjoy it, and I would encourage you, if you're enjoying it, don't let my opinions change your mind. I hope that you continue to enjoy it. Just let me know why I'm wrong in the comments below. But friends, if you liked the video, please leave it a like. If you hated the video, don't leave it a dislike. Just jump off the video. You don't have to do anything. And if you really loved it, hit the subscribe button below. But friends, the 2 things that I say at the end of these episodes are the most important things that I can say, which are this: you are more loved than you know, and you are so much more valuable than you realize. I hope that you have an incredible day, and I will see you in the next one. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. I want to let you know a couple ways to connect with me. First of all, we got an awesome Discord in the description. We've got a Patreon if you'd like to give to the channel and help support more video creation. And I am live on Twitch quite often over at twitch.tv/brightlifecommunity. Would love to see you there. Always love interacting on those live video streams. But I hope you have an incredible day, my loved and valued friend. Have an awesome one.